When the Japanese first spotted the ship approaching their positions near Iwo Jima, they didn't think twice about it. To them, it was just another supply vessel, one of countless that had passed through the Pacific in the years of war. Its unassuming profile, small size, and lack of visible armament made it seem harmless. A simple carrier of food, fuel, and ammunition destined for support roles behind the front lines. In a war where massive battleships, carriers, and fleets dominated the headlines and drew the fear of armies, a solitary supply ship barely registered on radar or in the minds of seasoned Japanese commanders. It was, by every account, a ship to ignore. But that assumption was exactly what made it so dangerous. The Japanese, conditioned to recognize threats by size and firepower, failed to account for ingenuity and subterfuge. And this particular vessel was a masterclass in deception. It had been carefully designed to appear innocuous, blending into the sea traffic so that even trained observers would categorize it as a non-combatant. Its superstructure was minimal, its deck seemingly empty of guns or defensive weapons, and its profile low on the horizon. From a distance, it looked more like a humble cargo ship than a vessel that could alter the fate of a battle. In the chaos of war, appearances can be fatal, and the Japanese misread this one completely. The crew aboard the ship understood this advantage better than anyone. They were trained not just in naval maneuvers but in the art of disguise. Every aspect of the vessel's outward appearance was curated to mislead enemy intelligence. Even the routes it took were calculated to appear routine, as if it were just following standard supply patterns, moving steadily between friendly ports without any strategic importance. This wasn't a bluff. It was a deliberate, patient setup, a long game that relied entirely on the enemy underestimating what lay beneath the surface. And it worked. Japanese spotters reported the ship multiple times, but each time it was written off. A note in logs describing a supply vessel of minor concern. Nothing more than background noise in the larger theater of war. What's remarkable is how the ship's presence forced Japanese commanders into a false sense of security. Because they did not recognize it as a threat, they made no effort to reposition their defenses or prepare countermeasures. Anti-ship guns were left idle. Patrols remained at predictable intervals, and the defensive focus stayed concentrated on the obvious threats: battleships, carriers, and known amphibious landing forces. It's one thing to face an overwhelming force head-on, but it's another entirely to be caught off guard by something you've deemed unworthy of attention. The complacency created by this misjudgment would prove devastating. At the same time, this scenario highlights a critical lesson in warfare. Not all threats announce themselves with loud, visible signs. In the Pacific theater, where the vastness of the ocean can make even the largest fleets appear as tiny specks, discernment was often a matter of life and death. Ships like this one exploited the limits of human perception, forcing commanders to question whether something small and seemingly harmless could in fact harbor immense power. The Japanese, focused on the obvious, overlooked the subtle, and that oversight would soon cost them dearly. Even the crew aboard the Japanese side had no reason to suspect the ship's real capabilities. Sailors manning coastal defenses, observers perched on hilltops, and officers poring over intelligence reports all recorded it as a low-level, routine presence. They noted its slow approach, its adherence to predictable shipping lanes, and its lack of visible armaments, all of which reinforced the belief that it was no threat. In essence, the ship was invisible. Not in the sense of being physically undetectable, but in the sense of being dismissed by everyone who saw it. It existed in plain sight, yet its significance was completely underestimated. This misjudgment was compounded by the psychological environment of the time. By 1945, Japanese forces were stretched thin, their resources depleted, and their focus narrowed to the largest, most immediate dangers. The idea that a single, low-profile ship could have strategic impact seemed implausible. They were trained to expect attacks from battleships, aircraft, and organized naval fleets, not from something that appeared ordinary. That expectation, combined with the deliberate design of the vessel to look ordinary, created the perfect storm of underestimation. And that's what makes this moment so fascinating. It wasn't sheer luck, nor was it a spontaneous miracle of war. It was careful planning, patience, and an understanding of human psychology. The ship's deceptive appearance, combined with the Japanese reliance on conventional cues for identifying threats, created a scenario where everyone was looking past the very thing that could, and would, change everything. It was an invisible threat, waiting quietly until the moment it could strike with maximum effect, all while the enemy remained blind to it. By the time anyone realized the danger, it was too late. The ship, dismissed as harmless, was already in position to carry out the operation that would shock Japanese defenses and alter the course of the battle for Iwo Jima. The irony is stark. In war, sometimes the smallest, quietest forces can have the greatest impact, precisely because no one sees them coming. And in this case, the Japanese made the fatal mistake of looking past what seemed insignificant, only to have it change the battlefield forever. By the time the Japanese realized the ship wasn't just a harmless supply vessel, it was already too late. What they had dismissed as a background element in the chaos of war turned into a central, unstoppable force. The ship, long underestimated, now became the fulcrum of a devastating assault on Iwo Jima. Its transformation from an unremarkable vessel into a weapon of precision and destruction shocked the defenders, who were still reeling from the sheer audacity of the attack. Suddenly, everything they had ignored, every assumption about the ship's harmlessness, collapsed under the weight of its real power. The operation itself was a masterclass in timing and positioning. The ship didn't just sail into the area blindly. It moved with careful calculation, taking advantage of tides, currents, and blind spots in enemy observation. Its crew, fully aware that any hesitation could be catastrophic, executed maneuvers with the precision of a well-drilled combat unit. Every turn, every adjustment, every approach to the shore was designed to maximize its effectiveness while minimizing exposure. The Japanese, caught off guard and still convinced of its innocuous purpose, had no idea what was coming until the first devastating strike hit. And when it hit, the impact was immediate and shocking. The ship unleashed firepower that the Japanese simply could not have anticipated. The sheer scale and accuracy of the attack stunned observers, who had assumed the vessel was incapable of anything beyond carrying supplies. It wasn't just the destruction of equipment or fortifications. It was the psychological blow of realizing that the thing they had ignored, the ship they had laughed at, was capable of overwhelming them in ways that traditional artillery or naval assaults had failed to do. The defenders scrambled, trying to mount a response, but their misjudgment had left them disoriented and unprepared. What made this moment so remarkable wasn't just the damage inflicted, but how it changed the dynamics of the battlefield. Prior to the ship's attack, Japanese forces had been focused on conventional threats: planes in the sky, battleships offshore, and landing forces on the beaches. Their defenses were structured around these assumptions, designed to repel what they considered likely attacks. Suddenly, all of that was irrelevant. The underestimated ship was able to reach positions previously thought secure, striking with precision and speed, reshaping the tactical landscape in minutes. It forced Japanese commanders into reactive mode, a position they were unaccustomed to, and disrupted the carefully planned defensive strategies that had been in place for months. The way the ship leveled its fire was as much about strategy as it was about raw power. Its guns, hidden or disguised for so long, opened up on fortified positions with pinpoint accuracy. Bunkers that had seemed impregnable crumbled, and defensive strongpoints that had been relied upon as key anchors for the Japanese lines were suddenly neutralized. Every shot seemed to have been calculated to maximize both physical destruction and psychological shock. Soldiers on the ground could hardly believe what they were witnessing. A vessel that had seemed insignificant was now dictating the pace of battle, forcing them into chaos and confusion. It's also important to recognize the human element in this attack. The crew aboard the ship had trained for months, anticipating resistance but relying on stealth, surprise, and timing. Their discipline and calm under pressure allowed them to execute maneuvers that seemed almost effortless, especially in contrast to the panic spreading among the defenders. This wasn't a reckless gamble. It was the culmination of careful planning, preparation, and an understanding of the psychology of their opponents. The Japanese had made the mistake of underestimating the ship, but the crew made sure that mistake would be fatal. As the assault continued, the defenders' attempts to respond became increasingly desperate. Anti-ship guns were brought to bear, planes scrambled, and even counterattacks were launched. But the element of surprise had given the ship a critical advantage. It was already in positions where return fire was difficult, if not impossible, and its impact on the battlefield had already shifted momentum. What began as an overlooked supply vessel had become a symbol of tactical ingenuity, demonstrating how clever planning and a willingness to defy expectations could change the course of a battle. The consequences of this attack extended far beyond immediate destruction. It altered the Japanese perception of what constituted a threat, forcing them to reconsider not just that ship, but every similar vessel that might have been dismissed in the past. In many ways, it became a lesson in humility. The idea that in warfare, the most dangerous weapon is not always the biggest or most obvious one, but the one the enemy fails to recognize. By the end of the assault, the defenders had suffered not only material losses but a profound psychological shock, one that would linger throughout the campaign. And for those watching history from afar, the story of this ship serves as a vivid reminder of the power of ingenuity and deception in war. A vessel dismissed as ordinary, overlooked at every turn, had the ability to shift the tide of one of the most fiercely contested battles in the Pacific theater. The lesson is clear. In war, as in life, appearances can be deceiving and underestimation can be catastrophic. What seemed insignificant became pivotal, and what was ignored became unstoppable. It was a stark demonstration that sometimes the smallest, quietest forces can wield the greatest power, and that those who fail to see them coming often pay the highest price.